Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with writer, performer, producer and magician Daniel Cremin. At 4 years of age, Daniel saw a magician perform a trick at a local library, which intrigued him. And at 11, he saw Paul Daniels perform a magic trick on TV. He was hooked. Daniel immersed himself in magic, and at every opportunity he would perform his tricks to friends, family, visitors to the house, and even to the local priest at his first confession. Since then, he has perfected his craft as a magician and extended his interest to acting, writing and producing shows. Daniel is a very busy man between his one-man self-written, self-performed show Why Magic, the Cork Fringe Festival that he co-founded, which will run from the 8th to the 10th of May, a new project Jacko the Musical, as well as his private magic shows. The real magic is storytelling, not the tricks. Let's hear from Daniel. Daniel Cremin, colossal welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Delighted to be on the podcast with you. Thanks for having me.
There I was thinking that I didn't know you and hadn't met you before, but you were telling me, absolutely, you have. When you said that, I'm kind of thinking to myself, Jesus, in what circles? But then you were telling me it was in Louis Copeland's in Cork. You punched in some, I presume, some part-time work there or whatever, was it?
Yes, yeah. So like really right from secondary school through to college. It was a great spot for me, yeah.
Yeah, and they're so lovely in there. They're so lovely in there.
Yeah, they are.
So if I ended up sitting next to you accidentally or whatever in a pub in town, actually, in all likelihood, which pub might it be if I was to bump into you?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Mutton Lane.
Ah, excellent.
That's one of my favourites. If you can get in there, if it's not busy, or else of course the Shinee or the Corner House are all two good spots as well.
Yeah, actually, Mutton Lane is a good chance of meeting me in there as well. I do like the Oval.
The Oval is lovely. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think Arthur Mains is a bit different to them. I like going in there.
So I like the Roundy as well, I must say. I think you'll always find someone to chat to in the Roundy. There's a good eclectic mix of people.
Yeah, so for the listeners now, we're actually listing off Cork pubs.
Yes.
So if we did happen to start chatting and, after a drink or two and the conversation bends around it, and if I was to say, then tell me, what do you do? How do you typically reply to that question?
Do you know what? I find it really difficult. But I generally say that I work in the arts and then would follow up by saying that I do a bit of producing, writing and performing. That's kind of the whistle stop explanation without getting into kind of too much detail, because you do everything, I think, when you're in the arts. I think you do whatever you need to do as well, wherever the jobs are going. So like I would have obviously started off as a performer myself, traditionally actually as a magician. So that's initially, I got the bug when I was 4 years old. Saw a magic show, saw Paul Daniels on TV, and I was just blown away by it. And I said, I want to be like him. And I talk about it in one of my shows as well. It wasn't even like the magic that he was doing, but it was just, he was small in stature, he was a little weird, but he owned all of it. And I think it was at a point in my life where I was like, that's what I'm like. It was the first time I could see something that I could be. And it kind of started like that. So I was probably 11 when I saw that. And then I was 4 when I actually kind of saw a magician for the first time. So I was 4, I was in a library in Douglas and I saw this magician do a trick. Could barely remember what it actually was, but I remember just looking around the room and seeing how enthralled everyone was. And that feeling just kind of stuck with me. But it was when I was older then, when I was 11, then I saw Bob Daniels on TV, and that really made me think, could do something like that.
So between the age of 4 and 11, did you still have that interest in magic, and were you doing
Completely,
anything with
yeah.
it?
So kind of like between the ages of 4 and 11, I would have gotten the magic sets for Christmas. Found out that my uncle was actually a magician as well. And he lives in New York. So whenever he came home, he'd teach me a trick. If it was good enough, the next time he came back, he'd teach me another one. And then it was kind of around that age of 11 that I guess I did my first actual gig and kind of thought that this could be a career from there.
Sorry,
Yeah,
did you say you did your first gig at 11?
I did. Yeah. So which is actually, it's a story I love telling. So it was when I was 11, I had like my first full kind of like set in my head of what I could do. And I would get my parents to drive me to hotels on a Saturday. I'd be in a suit that was a little bit too big for me and a box of props. And I'd walk up to the reception and I'd say, I'm Daniel Cremin, I'm here to perform at the wedding. And then I'd pause and I'd hope that there actually was a wedding on that day, and that there wasn't already a magician. And like most of the time, they just point me in the direction of the banquet hall. I'd go down, I'd start performing, I'd hand out business cards I printed on a black and white printer at home, and from that then get actual bookings and actual gigs. And that's kind of how it started. And then I guess I transitioned into more theatre then as I got older.
Yeah, so I think tagged onto the magician part, you're a little bit of a salesman and entrepreneurial, I guess.
Well, you have to be, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like at 11 years of age, the very thought of going into a room of adults that you didn't know would scare the shite out of most people. But not young Daniel, obviously.
But not like I think the idea was that it was never really like this could be a job to make money, because I wasn't thinking about that when I was 11. Now I did, I guess money was involved in one sense that before I did that gig, I was performing at like a family's like day 2 wedding. And I did this one card trick. And at the end of it, everyone at the table started like throwing coins at me. And that was the moment that I was like, oh, this could be a job. But it was never for that. It was, I want to find groups of people I can perform for. And that experience was like, weddings are where you go to do that. That was kind of it. Yeah. And then from there, then it would be like kind of weddings and corporate events as well. So I still do that a fair bit, but in tandem with that, I would have been in kind of drama schools and acting and growing up the whole way. And that's when then I really tried to start to merge them together around the same time that I would have started directing musicals and producing and stuff like that.
Okay, that's incredible. So I want to get around to talking about your new show, Why Magic. I want to chat to you about the Cork Fringe Festival. You're a co-founder and director. I want to talk to you about Jacko the Musical, and yeah, let's talk about some of your corporate work. But before we get to all that, I typically chat to people to really get a sense of where they came from and how the cogs in the wheel started turning for you. And you've pretty much explained some of that to me. But tell me about growing up and your folks and stuff. What did mum and dad do?
Yeah, so like my mother worked in Jacobs Engineering and my dad worked down in GSK and then Thermo Fisher. So they were in, kind of, we'll say not in the arts, but they were always super supportive of it. From the story of literally bringing me to hotels on a Saturday and then driving me up and down the country to gigs, they've always been extremely supportive of it. And then even now, it's because I think now they can kind of see that it can be a career, where then they were probably supportive of it, but I was also young. But now they're, just as supportive of it. And I guess like I said, they see that it's actually a career, which I think it's not a common Irish thing as well, to kind of go off and do, particularly in the arts. It's always, and is that what you really do? Or do you get paid for that? It's always those kind of lines. But no, the family have always been the biggest supporters, really. Still
Yeah,
are.
but it wasn't an arty house as such or musical or anything like that,
Well,
was it?
like myself and my three brothers would have learned to play the piano growing up, and we were definitely encouraged. We were encouraged to do everything. We were encouraged to try sports, to try music. I just wasn't hand-eye coordination in terms of sport was not my thing. On a stage with a deck of cards is another story. But we tried everything, and we were encouraged to stick with what we were good at, but more importantly, stick with what we enjoyed, regardless of whether we were good or not at it.
Yeah. And on the subject of being good at something, what were you good at as a 4-year-old and 5-year-old? Were you good at these magic tricks and the magic sets? Had you that figured out?
Yeah, like I feel growing up, like magic was definitely something that I found easy to latch onto. And someone said recently to me that they were like, a lot of magicians end up being left-handed, which I thought was quite interesting because I'm left-handed myself. And they said that sometimes the reason for that is because you're living in a world that's predominantly made for right-handed people, you need to think differently to be able to do certain things. And that's one of the, I guess, key attributes to being a magician is to take something normal and seeing how else could that be used or how differently could that be used. So I guess that could be kind of doesn't really answer the question, but that could be one of the tie-ins. But like I was always artistic. I always loved drawing. I always loved music. So it was definitely leaning more towards that kind of creative outlets, I guess, growing up the whole way, whether it was performance related or not.
And was it magic first and the kind of package of art and theatre is attached to that idea?
Almost at the same time, like I'm trying to remember really, I can't figure out which one came first. I think I saw The Magician in a Library first, but then I probably started doing acting classes in Declan Wolf before taking magic seriously. So it's almost like one came before the other, but then the other came before the first one as well, you know?
And were you being wheeled out when the relatives came over and there were other adults in the room? Yeah, come on, get Daniel out there to do a few tricks for you. Is that how it worked?
It was, you know what? It was probably less being wheeled out, and it was, oh, Daniel's already in the middle of the room holding a deck of cards. Let's get him to perform something.
Yeah.
That was probably it, because you're always trying new things that you want to try on other people that aren't your family as well, who've seen loads of different stuff. So growing up, it was probably any new person in the house. It was have a look at this and get your reaction from it.
So you were there in the thick of it anyway. Like, excellent. There's someone new coming to the door, and
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So I was going to say, even during my first Holy Confession, so I was, which make during your communion, we weren't told that it was happening. They said, "Oh, we're going down. We're doing our confessions now." So we were all really scared. We were given a little piece of paper that was said what you have to say. Went into the confession box, and I was like, "Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned." We're making up these sins, and I decided that I would like made up one, and then also said sorry for lying. So I balanced out the first lie with the truth. But then he said, "Okay, 4 Hail Marys," and he then says, "Have you any new magic tricks for me?"
What?
Now I was terrified at this point anyway. And then he says, "Have you any new magic tricks for me?" And because I lived locally, so he like the priest knew that my family, and he knew that I was a magician. And I ended up doing a magic trick in the confession box. And got it down to 2 Hail Marys by the time I left, which was great.
So, can you remember what trick you did with him?
I did. It was a trick with 2 sponge balls, and you put one in your hand and it disappears, and you put one in each hand basically, and one disappears from one hand, and then there's 2 in the other hand. And that's what it was. Yeah.
And your circle of friends then in school and stuff. So I'm just thinking of my own childhood, and that would have been the lads knocking the door, and you're either listening to music or you're out playing soccer. So what were you doing with your pals? What was your circle of friends like?
Yeah, like I guess my circle of friends probably started off coming from sport, actually, either from tennis or basketball. They were kind of the two sports that I would have played growing up. So like we would have been out playing tennis, we would have been out at matches, but it was still always, I guess, revolving around that was on the bus to the match, or when we were in the clubhouse waiting, it was then, oh, Daniel do a trick or Daniel do this. So it's always been there, even if it hasn't been the focal point. It's been one of the things that people have, I guess, always wanted to see when they've been around me, which is nice in one sense, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So going to school, did you always have a deck of cards with you and a few little bits and bobs for tricks?
Yeah. Always a deck of cards with me, but I think at the same time it was trying to figure out what you could do with stuff that weren't decks of cards, or what could you do with stuff that was just already in the classroom, and try and come up with stuff like that, which sometimes results in you doing a trick and it not working, which is a little embarrassing. And I talk about that in a previous show as well. But it's yeah.
And are tricks like off the shelf tricks that you buy and specific decks of cards and all that, or do you create your own magic and your own tricks using your own devices and creativity and all that kind of thing?
Completely. So I guess like growing up, most magicians and when they're starting out, there is tricks that you can just buy. So there's books that you can buy, there's props, there's methods that you can learn, and they're all off the shelf from other magicians to magicians from these magic shops. But as I got older, I was less interested in that stuff, mainly because it didn't fuel me creatively as coming up with something would. So all the stuff that I would do now in my show would be original to me, or would be completely adapted and reworked to suit my show better.
And is it all about the equipment you use? Or is it about that bit of mind reading? And I guess one of the reasons I'm asking this, I've got a good pal, and I'm sure you know him, Liam Sheehan.
Oh yeah, I know Liam well, yeah.
Yeah, and he used to come around with us, when we had a lot of corporate gigs and all that kind of thing. And Liam would come along, we'd hire him for a while. And of course, he'd be doing the tricks with us. I actually never liked it. I never liked when he was doing the trick with me. It's kind of like, you're my friend, and this just feels a bit awkward now. Yeah, but I used to watch him. It was so good. It was so good. I remember that there was a particular gig we were at down in Killarney at the launch of something. There were loads of kids, and I don't think the trick went wrong, but I think the audience wasn't appropriate for the trick that he did, and it kind of went a bit south. But anyway,
Oh, no.
but he was amazing. So yeah, I always thought with him they were like, I always thought they were. He was mind reading, and he had ways of knowing whether you blinked or whatever, that would give him hints. Are there disciplines in magic like that? Are there kind of genres where part of it is that mind reading stuff and other things are using, I don't know, devices or cards or whatever?
Yeah, no, there definitely is. There's genres in magic like there is in any art form. So there's kind of, I guess the way it's broken down is there's like large scale illusions, which would be the big kind of stage, David Copperfield sawing people in half, flying, all of that kind of stuff. Then you have close up magic, which is with cards, coins in the hands, really, just in front of you. You've got parlor magic, then, which is, I guess, for slightly larger audiences, probably like 60 or 70 people in a room. Then you've got types of what would be called mentalism, which is that mind reading, or what looks like mind reading. So a lot of it is rooted in psychology, but backed up by magic, so that if the psychology doesn't work, the trick still works. So it's taking what could be a traditional magic trick and framing it with this psychological lens, I guess. But for me, I focus kind of between traditional magic and that psychological magic. But the types of shows that I do now they're more theatre plays that incorporate magic. So I'll probably write the full show without figuring out how to do any of the tricks. So I'll write it as if I'm an audience member, and I'll say, oh, it'd be cool now the magician does this, or the magician makes this appear. I won't worry about how it's done. And then I'll work backwards to figure out how I can get as close to that audience experience that I've created. And that's kind of, I guess, my process for creating work.
That sounds amazing. How did you perfect your craft? How did you learn? Where does an 11-year-old magician learn? Is it books? Is it school? Is it YouTube? Are there conventions?
Yeah, so there's magic conventions, but I guess so. What I started off doing would have been reading books, and then like really just perfecting what was in the book, and then figuring out how I could do each trick, but not how it would look. So we'll say learn how to do the trick and have someone be able to have a magician look at it and not know it came from that book, to try and make it unique, try and make it different. And what that did was it helped me learn how to incorporate, we'll say, elements or methods of tricks as opposed to the overall trick into other things, and then work from there. Because some of the large scale illusions are the same methods as something that could be really small done in your hands, but just on a larger kind of scale, I guess. So that's probably how it started, was from reading books. And then I was in a talent competition when I was 14 up in Dance Cork, Firth and Crane. And it was run by Councillor Kieran McCarthy, who's the ex-Lord Mayor. He ran it. It was every year. I entered it one year, and so I ended up winning it with this kind of mentalism routine. But as a result of that, one of the judges knew Keith Barry's manager. So Keith was in Cork up in the Everyman the next night, and he said, "Oh, you should come along, and Keith will meet you." And what happened was, I went there, met Keith at the interval, and he just kind of took me under his wing at that point. And from then on, he kind of became a mentor to me and is now a close friend. So every time for the next few years when he was in Cork, he'd say, "Oh, Daniel, do you want to come and do you want to be a stagehand?" Because I had that magic knowledge as opposed to being a generic everyman crew stagehand. So I started doing that, and then he'd say, "Oh, will you come up to Dublin? Will you come up to the Olympia? Will you come to the INEC? Will you come to the National Opera House?" And then we just started working together, and particularly then during COVID, worked with him on his Zoom shows and some of his shows for RTE before COVID and after COVID. And he was definitely a real, I guess, mentor in terms of development of kind of figuring out what my voice was in magic, and figuring out what stories I wanted to tell and what I wanted to do. So he was a huge, I guess, source of inspiration, because growing up he would have been the person that I would have admired, and then to get to work with him was a really kind of surreal moment, to look down at your phone and you see a text from Keith, and for you not to react like you did when you were 11 and he liked your Instagram or something,
Yeah.
which was incredible. But then I would have met the likes of David Blaine and a few other magicians over in the US, like Penn and Teller, and those kind of people who are all like at the top of their game, but really interested in what the new magicians are doing. Darren Brown is another guy in the UK. I met him after a show he did in the Opera House, and I remember I got a picture with him at the stage door. I think I was 17 at the time and 25 now. 17 at the time. Sent him, so I was on Twitter and I put up the picture from backstage, and he replied to it and he said, "Oh, are you still in town?" And then I thought I was being very clever, and I said, "Oh, I'm on the way to Crane Lane," because I knew he was in Crane Lane the night before. And he replied and he said, "Oh, we're there too. I'll see you in a bit." So then I was decided then that I had to run into Crane Lane because I was on my way home, and I was like, "Oh my God." Went in, the bouncer wouldn't let me in. He said, "Oh, it's 23s." And I said to him, I was like, "Look, I'm 18." And he was like, "No, we're 23s." And I showed him the messages and he said, "Look, okay, if you can show me ID to say that you're 18, I'll let you in." And obviously I was actually only 17. So I was like, "Oh, I don't have it on me." And he said, "Oh no, sorry." And just as I was about to walk away, Darren walked past the door and he'd like a full gin and tonic in his hand. And he said, "Oh, what's the problem?" And I said, "Oh, they're not letting me in." And he just gave the gin and tonic to the bouncer. He said, "That's okay, we'll go somewhere else." He left all of his crew and his cast and his team inside there, left with me, and we went over to Webworks 24-hour cafe, where we sat down until probably about 4 in the morning with
God.
2 cups of tea, just talking about magic and talking about incorporating theatre into shows. And I think that was a really eye-opening moment for me, particularly because I was trying to figure out how to create a magic show where magic wasn't the key focal point, or where people didn't leave thinking they were tricked or only caring about how the tricks worked. And he seemed to really have cracked that in his theatre shows. So it was that moment that really made that shift for me into more what I would call a magic play or theatrical magic.
Yeah, because I guess there's two dimensions to it, isn't there? There's the ability to perform the magic trick or loads of tricks and you're very good at them or you're not very good at them. But there's a big element of performance in it, isn't it? And understanding a crowd and bringing them up and bringing them down and creating the tension and the little bit of suspense and everything.
Completely. Like with any art form, what you're trying to do is tell a story. And with magic, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to tell a story, whether it's this story that you're a psychic, or this story that you're a mind reader, or the story that you really are a magician. Like there's this French magician, Robert Houdin, which is where actually Harry Houdini took his surname from, because Harry Houdini's real name was Eric Weiss. But Robert Houdin said that a magician is an actor playing the role of a magician, because magicians aren't real. You know, it's like magic isn't actually real in terms of Harry Potter and Hocus Pocus. So like you are acting this role to an audience. And I find that really fascinating, particularly because I always found the story a lot more interesting than the magic. I feel like you could have if your trick is really fooling and no one can figure it out, that's all they'll think about when they're leaving. If the trick is really simple and they can figure it out, that's all they'll think about when they're leaving. But if you can create a story around it, that when they go away, they don't really care if the trick worked or if it didn't. But it was there as, I guess, a vessel for something else. And that's really what I try and instill into my shows, is make them leaving thinking that was a really good piece of theatre, or that was a really interesting story, and that the magic just helped to tell that.
Could you give me an example of a magic trick that now was performed as a story, and how you built the story around it?
Yeah, I guess so. The show Why Magic is loosely based on my life. So this is a show that I did, premiered it at the National Theatre in Iceland, and then did it here at the Everyman, and planning on bringing it up to Dublin there now at the end of the year. But it's loosely based on my life from an emotional standpoint, but the story itself is largely fictitious. But it follows the story of a young boy growing up in an Irish primary school who wasn't sporty and felt forgotten, and then found magic not to be forgotten. And kind of in finding magic finds himself, is essentially what that story is. And that opens by me doing the trick that I saw Paul Daniels do for the very first time. So I do this trick with a cup and a ball, and basically all you have to do is keep your eye on the ball, and he keeps putting it into his hand or his pocket, and it'll keep appearing underneath the cup. And it's like one of the most polished pieces of magic that you will ever see. It's down to a T. You could watch 10 different videos of him doing it in 10 different settings, play them all at the same time, and they'll be word for word, beat for beat, perfect. So I spent years copying that exact thing, and I then do it as Paul Daniels in Paul Daniels' voice. And what it then becomes is it becomes a character in the show, not a magic trick. So when people are thinking back about that show later on, they're not saying, oh, wasn't the trick with the cup and ball really good? They're thinking, oh, remember that moment where he saw Paul Daniels on TV? And that's really what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, that's pretty brilliant. It's funny, on not the last podcast, the one before it, I had a guy called Andy Freed, who's like a corporate leadership trainer, communications guy, and he's a colossal Bruce Springsteen fan. He brought out a book called Born to Lead. Everything that Bruce Springsteen does is all about being a great leader, and you can see that in everything that he does. And he went to see 95 shows, and he wrote kind of like a book about leadership based on what Bruce Springsteen does on stage, and understanding the crowd and rehearsing and storytelling. And I told him a story about a gig that I went to at the Everyman. No, it was actually the Opera House. And there was a girl, I can't even remember her name, which is really bad, but she was supporting David Gray. During the support act, the way people are wandering in with their drinks, they're not paying attention. They're not there for the support act. They're actually there for David Gray. And there was no one really paying attention, and, one or two polite rounds of applause after each song or whatever. But suddenly she told a story that connected with everyone. And from that moment towards the end of her gig, she captured people, and she got a huge round of applause for every single song. And the story that she actually told, and this is the weird thing, I can't remember her name, Daniel, but I can remember the story that she told. It was one about a tour
Yeah.
she was on, and her uncle wasn't well and he was about to pass, and he gave her some money and he told her she had to go on the tour, and she wrote a song about it. I remember the story. I remember the subject matter of the song just because it was carried in a story. I can't remember her name. That's terrible,
That's
isn't it?
fascinating. It just goes to show, though, that it's the stories are what last,
Yeah.
and that's throughout history. It's the stories that we remember.
So when you think about the other magicians, they storytelling in the same way that you're doing, or could I call you like a theatrical magician?
Yeah, because I do so much now, I wouldn't like magician is never actually really even one of the first titles that I would use for myself anymore. Unless it's, we'll say, in the corporate world when I still do the weddings and the corporate events. But I think every magician is telling a story, and even like whether they know it or not, it's a story you're telling. So you're either telling a good story or you're not putting in effort to tell a story, but the story is there, all the time. I think, regardless of what magician it is or what performer it is.
So if you're involved in a production yourself and there isn't magic in it, does that feel like you've lost an arm or something?
Do you know what? It used to. So I auditioned for Summer Revels, which was in Cork Opera House 2 years ago. And they were looking for someone to play a magician, which was to my benefit, I guess, in the end. But in that audition, I had to perform magic, but then I had to sing, I had to dance, and I had to act. And the dancing was fine because there would be a lot of movement in the types of shows that I would do anyway. And I guess whether it's a card trick or another performance, that's choreography in and of itself. To be able to direct someone's attention, you need to move your body in a certain way. So that was okay. The acting was fine because it was storytelling, but the singing I found really like deeply uncomfortable inside. And I just kept thinking, I was like, what are you doing? You're a magician. Why are you standing here singing a song in front of people? So that, like, for a while, I did have that thought. But I think now that I've been in lots of settings where magic hasn't been the focal point, that has kind of, I guess I've gotten more comfortable or more used to it. But there used to be a lot of imposter syndrome, I guess, when I wasn't performing or didn't have that crutch.
And that story that you're talking about in Why Magic, is that really, did you feel like a lost kid and that was your vehicle?
Oh, completely. Like it was, I guess, something that made me feel. It was something I was interested in, and it was a thing that made me feel interesting to other people. And it was definitely a support for me growing up, that I felt like I had something that I could share with people, and that I could
Yeah.
have a way of connecting with people. And I guess in one sense, I had a way of making people like me as well, which I think growing up was probably more important than it is now, but growing up, definitely it was to have something that made it easier to make friends, made it easier to talk to people, made it easier to socially engage. That if there was ever a lull, I could do a magic trick, or if I wasn't sure what to say, I could do a magic trick. It was definitely something that helped me grow and helped build my confidence as well. Completely.
It is kind of a thing, isn't it? That, Daniel is good at soccer and he's the leading scorer in the team, or he's a great piano player, or he's a guitarist, or he's in the school of music and he's really good at school. He's getting the top grades. It is kind of a thing that attaches to you. And as you're just
Yeah,
forming in exactly that way, it does become something that's important. I think we all like to be recognized for something, don't we?
I think so. I think we all want to be somebody. And sometimes that comes from an insecurity of never feeling like you're anyone. So you try and, I guess, latch onto what you're good at and make that you. And I think I did that for a while. And I spoke about that in my last show, which was It's All an Act. It was about me not knowing who I was if you took away the magic. And so It's All an Act actually came out of, it started off with me wanting to write a theatre magic play. Couldn't figure out how to do that. So then ended up writing a musical. And then at the end of that musical, a musical that no one's ever seen, it's up in a box on my shelf. But it was a 2-act musical with 12 songs. And at the end of that, I realized that that musical is about like, who am I if I'm not a magician? And then that's how I figured out that that's what the magic play was about. So it took writing an entire musical to figure that out.
Yeah. In a way, that's the essence of Win Happy. For me, Win Happy is about making choices in your life to try and get closer to what you believe is happiness, or the things that make you content, that give you satisfaction. And sometimes that takes a while to figure out. You need to try things, you need to break things, you need to discover, in your case, the things that make you feel recognized. And that's part of it, being recognized and being known for something. So in your case, you've got the Paul Daniels buzz. And that's weird as well, because Paul Daniels used to be on telly a lot. There was a Paul Daniels show.
There was.
And you mentioned Keith Barry. Yeah, there was a Keith Barry show where you see him on telly an awful lot. You ask me now about magicians being on telly. There isn't a name that comes to mind.
There's not. No, like Paul Daniels would have been the one to, I guess, make magic seem commercial or a viable option for, we'll say, television network. So he did the Paul Daniels Magic Show, which ran on the BBC for like 20 years. And it's I think been the longest running consistent program that's ever been on the BBC. And it was every week 2 hours of new magic, which was unheard of. And that really brought magic into the fore. Now, when I saw Paul Daniels, it was on a TV show that Channel 4 did of 50 Greatest Magic Tricks. And it was that segment of him doing the cup and the ball trick. But kind of after Paul Daniels, you would have had the likes of Darren Brown would have done shows on Channel 4 in kind of the mid 2000s. Around the same time, you would have had David Blaine making magic cool, doing street magic. And then you had Keith here on RTE. But in recent times, it's really the only time you see magicians on TV is with Penn and Teller's show Fool Us, which is over in the US, or else on talent competitions. But you don't see any production companies at the moment really running for, we'll do a 6-part magic show at the moment.
And yet then we have TV shows where people are cooking food. We have shows where people are dating. We have shows where people are buying properties, place in the sun, all this kind of business. We have comedians. You see comedian shows and everything else.
You do, yeah. I mean, even I think the thing about the comedians is, like, a lot of them, if they're panel shows, they're great. They do well. So they'll have a series. But if it's a solo comedian, they'll have a special. And I feel it's something about the arts in general. So we'll say not just magic, not just comedy. I think they feel because you go to it live, they just kind of leave it there as opposed to bringing it onto television as well. And I remember Brendan Gleeson said something about the fact that even when you turn on the news, you'll get the standard news, you'll get your weather, and you'll get sport. But you never get a section on the arts, which I think is, and obviously there's a huge draw for sport, and there's a reason that is within the news. But I think there should be a section that is for the arts, and I don't think you get live theatre translated into television as much. And it doesn't, I guess it loses a certain amount as well. It's going to a show live. It won't be the same as watching a professional, pro shot of it on TV. But I think it would open it to a whole new audience, which is the other side of it.
And if I hit Mr. Google right now and punched in magic shows near me, what would I find? Would I find anything?
You probably wouldn't. If you put up magic shows in Cork, you'd probably get old ones that I've done. You would have gotten Keith, who was in the Opera House a couple of months ago. I think Joe Daly is coming to the Everyman. He does a great children's show. He's coming in a few months, but it's not as consistent. And like magic used to be, we'll say back in the time of like Harry Houdini or Harry Blackstone or all, even Siegfried and Roy's early days, like they were kind of the superstars of entertainment as well. Like David Copperfield is the most successful solo performer in the world, which is crazy to think. He's been doing his show at the MGM Grand in Vegas for years. He's retiring this year now. It ebbs and flows, and I think there'll come a time that magic will become very popular again, like it had been before, and then it'll dwindle away, like it does with everything.
Yeah, if I'm in London and I'm Friday night in London and I go searching, I'd love to see a magic show tonight. Would I find one?
Oh, you probably would.
Would I? Okay, would I? Okay.
Yeah, no, you probably would in London, particularly because the Magic Circle is based there, and they do public shows fairly regularly. So you've a guaranteed, I guess, hub there as well.
Okay. Yeah, and again, in my circle of people, if I asked any of my pals, when's the last time you saw a magic show? I wonder what they'd say to me.
And it probably wouldn't have been recently. It's part of the reason why a lot of people say they don't like magic. And I think if you don't like magic, you just haven't seen a good magician. That's really what I feel, you know. It's the same as when people say, oh, like, I don't like coffee. It's like there's so many different types of coffee.
Yeah. How could you not like magic? Because it's like,
unless you've seen a magician that has this, I guess, abrupt approach, which is, haha, I've tricked you, which has never been something that has interested me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that I'm more clever than you. I do like, you get that every now and again.
So at a practical level, you have all of this interest, you're in secondary school and you're thinking about a career and everything. Like, which way was your head going? Like, I'm sure that the folks are nudging you saying, you better get you can't be doing those weddings all your life.
Yeah, you know, like they were super supportive of everything all the time, but also get yourself a degree so that you have a degree at least. So I went off and I did social science in UCC. So I did 3 years of that, which helped quite a lot because I ended up taking a lot of psychology modules within that. But that was very beneficial, very interesting. And coming out of that, I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, what am I going to do now? I could have gotten a job in social care, which is what lots of people in the course did. Or I could have gone on and done a master's or something in something else. And I really wasn't sure. And then I found this master's in UCC and it was a few days before the deadline. And it was just perfect. So it was a master's in arts management and creative producing. So it was this 1 year master's in collaboration with UCC and Cork Opera House that I guess gave you this business knowledge of running arts organizations or managing yourself as an artist. And then also this creative producing outlet. And it felt like I was working on a show at the time that I was doing up in the Firk and Crane, and it felt like it was the perfect degree that filled the gaps in my knowledge. It allowed me to stay in college another year because social science was only a 3-year course, as opposed to most of my friends who were still doing another year in college and didn't have to make big life decisions yet. So I went off and I did that. And that really then springboarded me into, I guess, the arts landscape more generally, just exponentially.
It's your profession now. This is it. This is your career. You're not going to be doing anything.
Yeah.
Now, besides Louis Copeland giving you some hours here and there back in the day or whatever, that's cool.
But that was my only other job. So it was, I would have performing at weddings, then part-time there, and then working as a producer and a writer and a director.
So at this point in time, what do you love doing?
What do I love doing? I guess I really love writing. I think that's probably my favorite thing. Writing and performing, I see them going hand in hand because I started off writing as writing for myself. So writing for shows that I was going to do myself. And then after that, then I would have started writing for other people and giving shows to other people. And from there, then I guess it's kind of a hard one to answer, as I love anything creative. Basically, I love telling stories, whether that's myself performing, writing, or working as part of a team to put on a production.
Okay. And the ultimate expression of that, I guess, was in your show Why Magic, which was the storytelling and your own personal story and your skill set around magic and everything, your profession. So you mentioned that went to Reykjavik. How in the name of God did that come about?
Yeah, so I guess that came through setting up Cork Fringe Festival, essentially. So it's probably best to start off with that story. Myself and another producer, Inika Lavers, we came out of that master's degree wanting to do something in Cork. And we felt that there was this gap for new and emerging work from young and old across the city. And that a fringe festival was, I guess, the perfect spot for that because fringe represents the rough and the polished and young and old voices that are equally important and vital. So I got onto the World Fringe Association, sent them an email, and I said, "Are we able to use the title fringe, or is it a protected term?" And they said, "Oh no, it's not. It's not protected. You can use it, no problem. Why don't you come over to Stockholm? We have a congress every 2 years. It's in Stockholm this year now as part of their fringe festival. Come over, meet us all, ask us any questions." And 2 weeks later, we were over there. I was speaking on a panel, and we were basically telling 100 fringes around the world that Cork was going to have its own festival. And it was only an idea at that point, but it was something then that we had to stick to. And we couldn't back out of it. And it was there then that we met the Reykjavik Fringe directors. So we built a partnership with them, and we were going to go over there anyway. But then they asked if I'd bring a show. And I was more than happy to bring a show. So brought it over there, got to perform it at the National Theatre of Iceland, which was incredible. It was just such an amazing experience.
Yeah, and you won a Best Storytelling Award, I think, at that festival, didn't you?
It did, yes. It won Best Storytelling, which I really appreciated because it meant that it was the first time that I really did a fully fledged theatre piece, and doing it somewhere that wasn't in front of people that I knew was quite nerve-wracking as well, but also had a certain level of comfort there because I didn't know these people. I was never going to see them again. But for it to be acknowledged for not best story or sorry, not best, we'll say one man show or something like that a magic show would have traditionally fallen into, but that it fell into best storytelling, which was, all the theatre shows were involved in that.
Okay, and you performed that at the Everyman as well, you were saying?
Then I brought that back here then and performed that at the Everyman, yes. Yeah.
So when can people who've missed out on that get to see it? Is that scheduled to get an airing anytime soon, is it?
It definitely will. So I'm in talks now with a venue up in Dublin about potentially doing a run. So hopefully it'll be back on its feet now by the end of the year.
Okay. And did you get media to it and all that kind of thing? Did you get it reviewed and get a bit of coverage for it?
No, we got a great bit of coverage in the lead up to it. Quite a lot of national coverage. I was on RTE a good bit. It was in the Examiner. It was in the Independent. I think the Irish Times. It was in the Ticket on the Sunday. So it got a good bit of coverage, a good bit of buzz around it. Yeah.
Was it a bit nerve-wracking in front of the home audience? Was it?
I think it was because, well, I guess they're the ones that support you the most. But when you're telling a story that blurs the lines between what's truth and what's not, it's always hard for them to try and figure it out themselves as well, But I think that's part of the show as well. Is it's up to the audience to figure out what's truth and what's not, and does it actually matter as well at the same time,
And the Fringe Festival, how many years now are you into it? Is this year 2?
So this is year 2, yes. So we started off last year. We had 23 performances across 10 venues over 3 days. Now we have 33 different shows, but over 50 performances over 3 days across 16 venues around the city.
Yeah, and all the different acts that are performing, are they local or do they come in from overseas, or how do you put it together? How do you even...
Quite a split. So I guess we send out an open call for artists. So it's one of the few, only festival in the city that has an open call. So artists can just apply with their show, and then myself and Inika will go through every application and choose what we like, what is feasible, what fits the space, what fits the audience. And this year we got over 200 applications, which was phenomenal. And all of it was really, really, really good. So it was very hard for us to pick. And it really came down to what shows what artists are going to make money as well, because we don't want to program a show that has a really big team and that there's no way you're going to, make money back off of it. So that was kind of one thing. There's only two of us that run the festival. So it's what's feasible, what's technically possible, and then what's just really different and what fits the fringe. And we ended up then selecting about 33 shows that we then fit into a program across the weekend.
Okay, and there's a website for that, isn't there, that people can...
There is, so corkfringe.com, and you can get all the tickets and all the information is all there. We've about 55% of our program is Cork-based work. Then the rest is a split between national and a little bit of international as well.
Yeah, so for anyone who's interested, that's between the 8th to the 10th of May. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It must have been terrible for you, as you were saying, just trying to look at all these honest-to-goodness shows that are put your way, and suddenly you're like, oh God, am I going to disappoint people? It must be terrible.
Yeah. And it was very difficult because it was all so good. But I think the people that weren't selected were really just not selected because we couldn't fit them into the program. And I think looking at the program this year, there's 6 shows that applied last year that didn't get picked last year, but worked on their show, developed it, made it work better in a fringe setting, and have reapplied, and we can really see the difference. And they're in it this year. So it'll always be a bit like that. And I think that's the beauty of fringe as well, is it's not that your show doesn't work. It's that sometimes it just doesn't fit, I guess, the mosaic that we've made for this year.
Yeah. This life that you've chosen, Daniel, now that we're talking about, shows being rejected or actors being rejected or your script being rejected, you live in that world of yes, no, and
Completely.
And the uncertainty that goes with all of that. From a personal point of view, how do you cope in that world?
It's very difficult because when you're in the arts and when you're an artist, you need to be open enough that you can be truly vulnerable and create work that shows that emotion, but then closed up enough that the rejection doesn't affect you when it inevitably comes. And it's very difficult to try and, I guess, oscillate between being really open and being completely shut off. But I find the best way to think about it is, if you're making the work that you want to make, then that's half the battle. And the people who don't, I guess, choose that work or don't want that work, they're not the people that you should want to work with, because they don't share the same vision as you. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people, or it doesn't mean that your show is bad. And this is just how I try to compartmentalize it in my head. But it's just that they're not the right person for this show. They're not the right person to support this project at that time. And it doesn't mean that because it's a no now, that show is a no. It just means that time was a no. That's what I really try and focus on, and just keep moving on. It's as cheesy as it sounds, it's that idea of every no is one step closer to an inevitable yes.
Yeah, and you have to get yourself into that mindset, but being practical, and we all have to survive in the world and put bread on the table. How do you cope with that? On a very practical level.
I've been lucky that I've always been working, and that there's always been projects and there's always been things moving on. And if there isn't, you can produce. I'm lucky that I can produce my own stuff, so I can decide that I want to put on a show. And then that can support me, so it's always a balancing act. But I think if it's what you love to do, and if it's the only thing that you can feel yourself doing, then you're gonna make it work.
Now, I've met you, and as we were talking when you worked in Louis Copeland's, you are bright and there's a spark about you and an optimism about you. Your peers in the industry, I'm sure not everyone has that brightness, and there's a lot of very talented people that don't have maybe the robustness or that optimism that you would have. Do you see rejection and uncertainty killing a lot of talent?
I don't know. I think the people that I generally tend to surround myself with are like-minded people. So they're the people that would be open to new work and open to new things. But okay. I think but in every industry, there is these, pockets of people who are used to doing things a certain way and will stick to that certain way and will work with the same people. And like that's okay too. But I think for me, I definitely love trying to support as many people in as many ways as I can. And so I'll always push for trying to make something work, over sticking with what I've always done.
Yeah, but like that now, do you see people who aren't coping with the disappointments and getting really down, and you're having to, G them up when you can see the talent and give them that argument that you're one step closer to a yes?
Yeah, all the time, all the time. And I have my friends that do it to me when I'll submit a play or I'll be working on a project and then it won't go somewhere. And you just need that one good friend that kind of just jolts you back out of that feeling sad for yourself stage and reminds you that you are good and your work is good and that it will be recognised.
Yeah, okay. Is Cork a good playground?
Definitely. I think particularly there's a certain, dare I say, a renaissance, but there is a certain
You've said it now. It's
air.
out loud.
Yes, there's a certain air of artistic talent in Cork and creative groups that are really starting to make new work, whether it's theatre, whether it's dance, whether it's interdisciplinary work. There really is lots of these collectives and these communities that are trying to do new and really interesting work. I think it's a very exciting place to be in the arts at the moment.
Yeah, because I imagine when you're in that very narrow genre of the magician world, did you think, oh God, I'm going to have to go to London? Or, you mentioned that magic circle. Did you consider going abroad at any point?
Definitely. I think every now and again, I think, oh, traveling, or moving. But I quite like Cork. I have an affinity to Cork, and I think there's a lot of potential for Cork to grow. Sounds like I'm from Cork. We love the place,
but we kind of do, don't we?
But it's a great base for me to still be able to work abroad and still be able to move and travel and come back and do shows in other countries and but still not have to move fully.
Okay, brilliant. Tell me about Jacko the musical.
Yeah, Jacko the musical is basically, it's a War of Independence musical that I didn't want to be about war because that's already been done. Brian Flynn did a fantastic musical, Michael Collins, which ran at Cork Opera House and runs around the country every year. But I really wanted to tell a story about this, I guess, soldier in the War of Independence called Michael Murphy, who was my great-grandfather. And he was heavily involved in the war down in Cork. Like everyone has someone in their family that has a link back to that time. And Jacko, the name Jacko, I guess, came from when Mick was arrested. He was brought to Spike Island, but he said his name was John O'Brien. Everyone called him Jacko, and he only got 6 months there because they didn't actually know who he was. So the story came out of me doing all of this research about Mick and about the work that he has done and what he did for Ireland's freedom and into the Civil War and the capture of the Upner, which Tom Mahon did a fantastic book on. And I felt like there was a story there. I had his autograph book from Spike Island that people signed. So anyone that was on Spike would have signed this autograph book with poems and stories. And then I had his witness statement, handwritten witness statement from the war. And I felt like he's already written the story. I just need to put it together. But I didn't want it to be about the war. So I was thinking, how could we make this work? And then I looked at like the age that he was. So Mick was 19 when he joined the Irish Volunteers and about 26, 27 by the time the war ended. So he was growing up. He was young. He was finding himself like most of the young men and women during the war were. And that's what the story is now molding itself into, is Mick finding himself in a country that's finding itself, I guess.
Amazing. Will that see the light of day?
That definitely will, yes, at some point. When it's ready, it will.
Okay. Are we talking next year, right?
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully next year we'll get some sort of a rehearsed reading of it anyway.
Fantastic. And to finish with the corporate work, I do want someone who can entertain and come to my corporate gigs or even the weddings. You still do all of that stuff as well, do you?
I do. I still do all of that, primarily around Christmas. That's kind of the busiest time of year in terms of the corporate Christmas parties, and then the end of the summer for the summer barbecues. And that's very different then. That is not theatrical storytelling because they don't know you're there. You won't get away with sitting on a stool on a stage for 10 minutes talking. So it's quick, it's interactive, it's immersive, it's getting audience members up on stage and having they're more just about having fun.
Okay.
So they're very different. And I enjoy those equally as well, because they they let me not have to put on an artist hat as much.
Yeah. So do you enjoy them as much as the 11-year-old did when he rocked up to the Rochedale Park Hotel or whatever?
Completely. I do. I get that little buzz of that kid every time I do those gigs, which is the main reason I keep doing them, to be honest.
Yeah, but you get paid now, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone wants to contact you, Daniel, how can they do that?
Yeah, so my website, danielcremin.ie, is probably the best way to get me there. Or I'm quite active on Instagram as well, which is Daniel_Cremin.
What's happiness to you?
What's happiness to me? I guess it's doing what you enjoy with people that you love.
All right, that's that's a good formula. And if I put winning into it, when I know you said you weren't terribly sporty, but yeah, you did say you love basketball or whatever. That feeling of putting the ball in the back of the net, what gives you that feeling?
Oh, I guess what gives me that feeling is, I think when a show is up on its feet, particularly one that I'm not involved in or something that I'm not actively performing in, and you see all of the different cogs working perfectly together, I think that feeling, that's like, you've done it. That's that winning feeling.
Amazing. I've one last question for you. And I mentioned it to you earlier in our conversation that for me, happiness is a little bit like figuring out what you really want in your life and making choices to get that little bit closer to it. What's the best choice you ever made? And even the hardest choice that put you on your way, the best choice?
Best choice I ever made. I have to say, I think the best choice I ever made was not taking a piece of advice. And I'll elaborate on that because I was told by someone years ago to never take criticism from someone you wouldn't take advice from, which I thought was very, very interesting. So the piece of advice almost came as a form of criticism. It was when I was younger and I was thinking about these storytelling shows that a few magicians said to me, they were like, oh no, don't do that. No one will care. Wait till you're famous, wait till you're known. Then you can spend 15 minutes sitting on a stool telling a story before you do a trick, but you can't do it now. And I never really understood what they meant by that, because if I was a young playwright, that's all I would be doing. And I felt in one sense it was probably them never feeling like they could do it, so felt that it wasn't something that should be done. But if I didn't do that, if I didn't start doing theatrical magic, I wouldn't have done my masters, which means I wouldn't have done the Fringe, which means I wouldn't have directed musicals or wrote musicals. So that moment of being firm in my knowledge that no, this could work, I think definitely changed everything.
Yeah, and I wonder, were they the people who were giving you that advice? They were pure magicians.
Pure magicians, and it wasn't coming from a bad place. It was probably coming from a place of, this audience is going to talk over this young person, and is not going to listen. But if you're telling the right story, they will.
I think you were different to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you were the theatrical magician.
Exactly, yeah.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really, really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing Why Magic whenever that comes. I'm looking forward to catching up at the Cork Fringe Festival, some of the gigs around that, and Jack of the Musical, the big launch in 2027, wherever it happens.
Yes. Can't wait for that. Yes, no, definitely. Yeah, and I'll keep everyone up to date on that over on my Instagram as well.
Yeah, good man yourself. Thank you so much. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.